Chapter 2. Memories and Blueprints. The path to the bridge wasn't marked on any official map, but Jake could have walked it blindfolded. His boots crunched over gravel, weeds brushing his ankles like they still remembered him. The air was thick with pine and nostalgia, both of which made it hard to breathe. Each step felt like it rattled a locked drawer in his chest, one he wasn't sure he wanted to open. The workshop stood just beyond the tree line, half swallowed by vines and bad decisions. The roof sagged, like it had given up hoping anyone would return, and the windows wore a permanent film of dirt and regret. The old Weston sign still hung crooked above the door, hand-painted, faded, and loyal, like everything his father had built. Jake pushed open the creaky door, ducking instinctively even though he was taller now. The smell hit him first, old wood, oil, and something vaguely like mothballs. It was the scent of his father's world, undisturbed and unapologetic. He stepped inside, brushing cobwebs off his shoulder. Tools still hung on the pegboard, each one outlined in faded Sharpie like they were sacred. They probably were. His dad used to say that a misplaced wrench could ruin a week's worth of progress, or worse, throw off the entire structure. Jake used to laugh at that, until his first solo build went sideways because he measured with the wrong square. His dad never said, "I told you so," just handed him a broom and said, "Start clean." Jake moved slowly, fingers trailing along the dusty workbench. An old tape measure, a rusted level, and a coffee mug with a chipped rim sat exactly where they'd been left. The mug read "Measure once, if you trust your gut." Jake snorted. That was more like his dad. He lifted the mug for a second, thumb tracing the crack. It felt oddly reassuring, like something imperfect that still held its shape. The far corner held a stack of milk crates and a warped shelving unit with cans of nails, screws, and plans that never got filed properly. Somewhere behind it all, he could still hear the faint scrape of wood being sanded, his father humming an old hymn under his breath, and then he saw it. A small wooden box tucked under the workbench. Not hidden, exactly, just waiting. He pulled it out and blew off a layer of dust, coughing as it clouded the air. The latch stuck at first, but with a little pressure, it popped open. Inside was a worn leather journal, edges curled, cover cracked with time and use. Jake's throat tightened before he even touched it. He didn't know what he expected to find, but it wasn't this. Not this personal, not this close. He picked it up slowly, like it might disappear if he moved too fast. His father's handwriting covered the first page, journal entry. "If you're reading this, you probably miss me. That's all right. Keep reading anyway. T.W." Jake brushed the dust from the cover, revealing the scuffed brown leather beneath. His father's journal. The spine was cracked, the strap worn thin from use. He untied it slowly, reverently, like opening a sealed memory. The pages inside were filled with sketches, scriptures, measurements, and half-written thoughts that read more like parables than plans. Tucked between two entries was a yellowed scrap of paper, creased down the middle, faint lines drawn in pencil still visible. A bridge sketch, unfinished. The date in the corner made Jake pause. Just 3 weeks before his father died. Jake sat on the workbench, journal in hand, as if seated in some sacred confessional. The next pages were filled with blueprints, some for the bridge, some for projects Jake didn't recognize, but interspersed were verses, notes, and odd phrases scribbled in the margins. Psalm 127, 1. "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain." God's name showed up more in these pages than Jake remembered hearing aloud. Maybe his dad had been preaching through the pencil. Don't build on talent. Build on trust. Weak beams can't carry legacy. Strengthen the support. Jake flipped through page after page of structural sketches, intertwined with scriptural truths. His dad hadn't just been building something physical, he'd been building something eternal. They weren't just about a bridge, they were about becoming a bridge. And now, somehow, the blueprints weren't just his dad's anymore. They were his. Jake turned over the blueprint of the bridge, only to discover another one of his father's usual scribbles. Build to connect, not to impress. Jake exhaled slowly, the blueprint trembling slightly in his hands. All at once, the project didn't feel like just a bridge anymore. It never had. Jake sat on the edge of the workbench, his mind drifting backward, and suddenly he was 12 again. The old garage had smelled like sawdust and oil, and Jake sat swinging his legs from the edge of the workbench, a soda can sweating beside him. His dad stood at the drafting table under the humming shop light, pencil in hand, eyes narrowed with quiet concentration. "Why this bridge, Dad?" Jake asked, breaking the silence. His father didn't look up right away. He kept sketching the arch across the river and the anchor points on each side. Then he paused, pencil hovering midair. "Because this town needs to remember how to reach each other." Jake tilted his head. "But there's already roads." A slow smile crept into the corners of his dad's mouth. "Yeah," he said, finally glancing over, "but not all gaps are made of rivers." Jake had frowned, pretending to understand. But the weight of those words had stayed with him, tucked somewhere deep behind the distractions of growing up and leaving town. A creak from the back of the workshop snapped him back to the present. Jake hadn't understood what that meant back then, but now, maybe, he was starting to. The memory faded, but the feeling stayed, settling over him like a tool belt he hadn't worn in years. The kind that weighed something, but also gave you what you needed when you needed it. He looked around the dusty workshop, eyes landing on the cluttered bench. The layers of time, of projects unfinished and pain unspoken, covered everything, but underneath it all was still a place to build. A place that had held his dad's hopes, frustrations, prayers, and now waited for his own. Jake set the journal down gently, then reached for a rag and an old paintbrush. He started brushing off sawdust, gathering rusted bolts into a can, stacking wood scraps with hands that remembered more than he thought they would. The rhythm of it was almost healing, wiping, sorting, returning things to their place. His father used to say that a clean bench meant a clear mind. Jake had always scoffed at that. But today, it didn't seem so far off. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The act was enough. By the time the sun began to dip past the ridge, the workbench was cleared, at least the corner of it. A small space, but ready. Jake stood back and looked at it, his breath steady, one beam at a time. Not everything had to be finished today, but something had to start. He tucked the journal under his arm and stepped outside. The light had shifted. Afternoon was giving way to early evening, the trees casting long shadows that danced across the dirt path. As he made his way toward the bridge, the unfinished frame loomed like a question waiting for an answer. He could almost hear it now. The echoes of footsteps from the past, his father's voice carried on the wind like a whispered draft line. He stood at the edge of the riverbank, journal clutched in one hand, and looked up at the steel bones of the bridge. It felt less like an abandoned project now, more like a calling, and more like an invitation.